Hello, and welcome to Confidently Wrong, a show by regular dudes talking with confidence about content we have no right to speak about with any kind of authority, but do it anyway. I'm Wesley Nakamura, and as always, I'm joined by technically Emmy-winning director Brian Redondo and Savon Jones, aka Captain Vonnie. That's right, I said Emmy-winning. This is episode 93, and we do a deep dive into the first season of Andor. I'm confident that it's going to be the best show you've ever listened to, and well, hey, if it's not, you can always ask us for a refund.
Incredible!
Hello, gentlemen. We're happy to be here. We finally got our schedules to mesh like Voltron or Megazord. Tommy, R.I.P.
Also the Destructicons.
Oh, yeah. Is that what it's called?
Building Devastator, yeah.
That's what it said, Devastator.
Yeah, Devastator.
Not Unicron? Was that different?
Unicron is just a planet. That's just a big
right?
boy on his own.
What was the one where they built the really big transformer? Was that Devastator?
I'm gonna need you to use more I'm gonna need you to be way more. That is not helpful.
The really
What's the robot where the robots come together for the robot?
Was that just Megatron when he got in his weird sharp form? He was
actually Megatron becomes smaller when he transforms, right? He turns into
he turns into the gun.
Yeah, he becomes small and sleek.
So
which is very odd.
Conservation of matter.
Conservation of mass they never quite cared about that in Transformers. The less you think about it, they got small 2-seater Camaros turned into 10, multiple
story
the size
buildings,
of a small house battle bot, with missiles.
What is that called? Beetle? No. What's a
Beetleborg or something, right?
No.
Bumblebee. You're talking about Bumblebee.
Bumblebee, the movie, was actually not bad.
Wasn't our friend Miss Hawkeye? I don't remember her character's name.
Haley Steinfeld. She was in it and good. She was good in it.
I just remember her from the trailer. And that's
better than Shia LaBeouf.
She was in Transformers?
Yeah. Well,
she's in the Bumblebee movie.
In the Bumblebee one.
Bumblebee had his own spin-off movie.
Yeah.
I remember that.
How wild is that?
It was good. You should watch it. On Redbox or on free streaming. Don't pay for it. Okay.
So in other words, don't ever waste your time watching this.
No, it's good. It's good. I enjoyed it.
Okay.
There's plenty of other things to watch.
Well, we're going to talk about on this show a show worth watching. I'm gonna put my stake in the ground. This is a show worth watching. I don't know if Savon's gonna entirely agree, but we're gonna talk about Andor. I've been dying to talk. Brian was like, "Do we need to talk about this? You already talked about it with Miles, guys. We have to talk about this show." I couldn't wait to hear what you guys had to say about it, because I think you guys will do a good part picking apart all the nuance and detail of what actually makes this a show that I enjoy, even if I am, as Mike would say, smooth-brained, right? No wrinkles.
So we're going to do the heavy thinking for you? That's what you brought us here to record?
No, I just want to hear what you guys had to say. I think I have some reasons why I think I liked it, but, I don't always pick up on the small details, and I don't have the writing, directing, editing background that Brian has, so I think he's going to bring some expertise into what really makes this show shine, especially in comparison to some of the other Star Wars live-action shows we've seen, and even maybe comparing it to some of the MCU stuff we've seen lately.
Can I just do a little tangent? Speaking of my credentials to actually, do the heavy lifting for you, because, I know writing, directing, script writing, editing, camera stuff. We got to change the intro to the show, because I have news for you guys.
What's that?
I'm not only an award-winning director or filmmaker, I am technically now an Emmy award-winning director, filmmaker.
How technically? What's a technically mean?
Technically, because I used to work at a little place called The New Yorker.
Yeah, you did.
I was
Jeffrey Toobin,
senior video editor. I was never on a call with Jeffrey Toobin.
Savon has no idea who that guy is.
No comment.
What happened to him.
Savon, you should look it up. Actually.
I know how to stay in my lane.
Look up Jeffrey Toobin and Zoom meetings.
Do not.
Don't worry, none of that is going on during this podcast recording. But so over at this place called the New Yorker, I was the main video editor, but I also consulted on a bunch of other video type projects. And so we actually acquired this really cool 360 VR video called Reeducated, and it's about detainees in Xinjiang, right? At these re-education secret detention camps in Xinjiang.
Oh,
It's like a
dang,
very
okay.
awful humanitarian crisis, or human rights abuse crisis. And anyway, that, I consulted on that a little bit. Like I gave a note here or there. I was like, it's a little hard to understand what that animation is doing, or like, I think there's a jump in the story here. Like very tiny
Yeah.
notes.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's editing.
that project won an Emmy Award this year, and my name was in the program.
Hey!
So I'm gonna take that as a win for me. I am now Emmy Award winning director Brian Redondo.
Let's go.
Oh my goodness.
I'm owning it.
Oh yeah.
What did you get credited as? What was your role? Consultant?
On that, I think it says I'm senior editor.
Oh,
so there's like,
okay.
executive producers who's like my boss and people out over at my former work.
Uh-huh.
So they're listed in it. And then of course you got the people that actually made it,
Yeah.
like the directors, the illustrators, all those people. And then you got me who's just listed as senior editor. So
Okay.
basically what I'm trying to say is that everything uttered here from now forward has the full weight of a golden Emmy, and that means I can't be wrong.
Dang, my son got the championship belt.
Oh my
He's just gonna
goodness.
pull rank.
But you won't get a trophy, or you will?
No.
No. Okay.
No way. I think there's like one trophy.
Oh, there's only one trophy. Okay.
And
it's like a state championship. You'll play for like a sports
stays
team
at the school.
You put that in the school with it, and you get the emotional attachment to it. Like, yeah, we did that.
Yeah, it's not even like the Stanley Cup trophy. Like it's not coming to my house for 5 days or something, and then I pass it along.
It's all right.
No,
reflected glory here, and you contributed. I mean, it may not have been as strong, or may not have won.
You have a stake in it, like an NFT.
Yeah,
I contributed the 0.01%, just as much as Cassian Andor did in developing an important Star Wars piece of mythology.
Hey, you got it right. A little zip, zip, zip. Oh, well, Savon hasn't seen that part yet. All right. So, Andor. Oh my God, I want to talk about this show. Okay, so this first part, this first part is going to be spoilers free. So if you haven't seen the show, and I know a lot of people sort of haven't gotten hooked into it or haven't gotten into it, so we did want to have a little piece of the show where maybe you got to hear about it from a spoilers free perspective, and then maybe made a decision on whether you want to jump in. Hint, I think you should jump into this show. You will not regret it. So many people on my social media feed are calling Andor the best live action Star Wars, period. Like no caveats, no qualifications, just the best live action Star Wars.
Amen.
What did this series do that was so effective? And ultimately, do you end up agreeing with that sentiment? Brian, we're going to start with you, the Emmy Award winning director.
I mean, I'm just going to talk and then you can turn off the podcast. But I wholeheartedly agree with that statement. That is not hyperbole whatsoever. Andor is the most mature, complex, and human Star Wars effort in the entire franchise. I mean, just the attention to detail alone elevates this thing above all those other efforts. You have a huge cast of characters with conflicting motivations.
Mm-hmm.
They speak in double speak. They have deplorable heroes, commendable villains. So much signs of life in each culture and planet and environment that everybody inhabits, and they're all working towards different goals that really complicate the normal, simple, childish battle between good and evil that we're so used to in Star Wars. That really emphasizes how much more childish that feels relative to this in Andor, right? It is complicated, complex portrayal of how rebellions come into existence. And Andor does such a fine job of investigating all the different nuances of that, very difficult real world issue, and dressing it up in the Star Wars universe, but because of how well richly detailed and realized it is, it becomes all the more relatable to what we can imagine as people living in real life outside of a Star Wars fantasy, what a rebellion is like. And I think Andor really nails it, and because of that, it's just so much more mature than anything else in the Star Wars universe. And then to top it all off, just the execution of it in terms of the craft, the cinematography, the editing, the music, and the performances, because they're working with such rich material, all of those things are also at a very high level. And it's really just a wonderful Star Wars series.
Whew. Savon.
I mean, I'm gonna echo most of what Brian said. Like, it's a
Okay.
mature story. They are really getting down into some concepts we don't like. The moral greatness of this is far beyond anything we've ever seen in Star Wars. One of our big complaints about Boba Fett was that they didn't want to lean into the moral gray area of the show, where you don't really see Boba Fett outright execute people the way we see Cassian do on several occasions in this show. So just to give you an idea of what that tone shift looks like for a character who in Andor is ultimately more heroic than someone like Boba Fett, right? So they really did turn up the seriousness and grittiness to a level that we haven't seen. Now, what that means in the context of Star Wars might be up for debate, but there is no debate about the quality, production value, acting, and character and dialogue driven experience that you get watching Andor. And like, it's top notch, and it's one of the strongest things that this show can lean on. This is for those Star Wars fans who like a grittier, more mature story. I think we watch Star Wars for different reasons, and this is a type of story that gets maybe touched on in the Clone Wars animated series. They maybe get into some of those types of themes, but this is one where this is the central theme rather than just a recurring bit, and it shines in that regard.
I like it. I think it's definitely got to be considered as one of the strongest entries. In terms of the live action, it's hard to beat, the Empire Strikes Back in terms of all the things that were happening, right? All the stakes for our heroes in that show or in that movie. I know a lot of people really like Revenge of the Sith, right? The third episode.
It's the best Star Wars movie.
Oh
Yeah.
boy.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So right, Savon loves that, that, and then
Everyone does.
I also love that because it's dark.
Yeah.
Yeah, the two episodes you mentioned, both the darkest ones. Not surprising.
Maybe that's true. And then in terms of the long wait we had between the prequel and then getting to Rey's story where The Force Awakens comes back, and what a joy that was, right? To relive sort of the nostalgia of Star Wars, have a new fun adventure, and a brand new hero that we could really get behind. I mean, I think that was also a really great version of Star Wars, a really great entry into the Star Wars universe. But I don't know. And like, I love that movie. I don't know that that movie stuck with me in the same way that this one has. I'm notorious for not having any memory, and so many scenes are just like seared into my brain even 2 weeks later. And guys, that's a long time for me. I know that doesn't sound like a long time, but a long time. And maybe 6 or 7 weeks since the show started, I'm still like thinking about, how the different things played out over the course of the series. The acting was so good. I mean, Stellan Skarsgård, Diego Luna, and then Andy Serkis, right? Just tons of crazy stuff that they were doing in terms of letting us into their world, their thinking, their motivations, their struggles. All of that happened. The actress who played Dedramira, I'm blanking on her name right now, fantastic job. I mean, just so many things going on. The characterization that was happening, like every character felt different and real. I mean, it was just like really, really cool. And the stakes that they built into each episode and then across the series through Tony Gilroy's writing, I thought was like really cool. So I definitely think it's got to be considered as one of the strongest pieces of live action for the Star Wars universe, and just really, really enjoyed it. So We're good there. I don't think we need to talk about too much then. So should folks out there watch the show if they haven't? It seems like we're all on board that it's very good. Savon, what do you think?
Yeah, so again, we said before, this is a good show, production value, acting, all of that. But I think where I struggle with this show and where I would question whether I'd recommend it to people is
What? What?
Yeah,
How is this not a no-brainer?
It's not a no-brainer because people watch Star Wars for a very, at least in my opinion, specific type of experience. When I grew up to Star Wars, I'm there for the spectacle, for the space opera, for the fantasy elements, the space wizards.
Okay.
It's definitely much more of an action-based experience. And the Star Wars world obviously is so big and diverse, it lends itself to telling a wide range of stories. But I think no matter what stories we've seen, whether it's video games, comics, TV shows, movies, whatever, they still, even when it wasn't Jedi-based stories, kept a pretty good foot in that fantasy adventure area. This entry is nothing like that. And so while it's good, you can be a Star Wars fan, and this might not be giving you what you're looking for when you're generally watching Star Wars. And so how I felt watching this show was that I was watching an amazing show, but I wasn't enjoying it as a Star Wars fan. I was enjoying the show just as its own thing, which I don't think is necessarily bad, but I do think that it puts it in a weird place of who is this for? Because the story on its own is
it's
amazing.
For people who like good shows.
Hold on.
Star Wars fans like good shows.
Do they?
A lot. So that's the deal, though. A lot of stuff that makes this show good and what makes you appreciate it, I do think requires a bit of background as a Star Wars fan, because it doesn't lean heavy into the sci-fi, but it leans into it enough to where you have to acknowledge that that's an important element of the setting, and like that affects how the story progresses. Multi-planet searches, all this type of stuff. But if you're just not into Star Wars in general, the Star Wars brand might turn you off from a really, really good story. And I think for some people, the show can kind of get caught in this weird no man's land. Like, there are lots of shows that are about these spy thrillers and all these types of dark, morally great characters and themes. But I think because they're not Star Wars, they can lean a little bit more into that mature audience where you have swearing and, you don't have to have blood and gore, but you could still feel the PG-13 hovering over this show, which is not a bad thing. But it exists in kind of a almost weird jack of all trades where I think certain fan bases will struggle to get pulled in. Like, again, I like this show. I'm not enjoying it as a Star Wars fan. And you might like these thriller rebel themed shows, but not like the set piece of Star Wars. And I do think that makes it hard for me to recommend to, like, my friends who like Star Wars. We're there a lot of times. You're there for the action and lightsabers and whatnot. If there's none of that in this show, that's a much harder sell for another show that might have similar types of themes, but it's just its own. It doesn't have Star Wars as like a brand overlay that you have to acknowledge. And I do think that that's a fair barrier into getting people into the show.
I think, Savon, you're actually right, and what I'm going to say is going to build on what you've said. And I think a lot of what you're saying is a reason for maybe why Andor isn't as widely popular as perhaps its quality should dictate. Yeah, exactly, right.
Absolutely.
Because I think the audience for Andor is really anyone that hates Star Wars as much as I hated the first two Harry Potter movies. Like, this is for them. And if you know what I mean, like, if any of you guys into Harry Potter, right? Those first two movies are just childish BS.
They're campy and childish, is meant for kids.
But like, me watching them, I can tell, like, oh, this is actually an interesting universe. And the whole series doesn't take off until Prisoner of Azkaban, right? When the series takes a much darker, much more mature turn, much more creative turn, but within that sandbox. So I'm using that as an analogy for Andor. If you, like me, really dislike a lot of the stuff going on in the Star Wars universe, like, childish good versus evil, ridiculous lightsaber battles, a lot of toy
Space
tie-ins.
wizards.
Yeah, space wizards.
Space
But-
bounty hunters and their animal companions and animal babies and
yeah,
spaceships.
like basically like droid and animal familiars who are just there to sell plushies. You know, if you kind of like hate all that stuff about Star Wars, but you're still kind of interested and into the fantasy realm that they exist in, then I think Andor is the thing that you've been waiting for. Like, for that is kind of basically what the show has been like for me. I'm someone who I've said on this podcast before, I hate Star Wars. I think I hate Star Wars more than I like Star Wars. You know, it's always a weird balance for a lot of fans of Star Wars, right? For me, like, that balance has weighed heavily into the hate territory, especially as, you know, Book of Boba Fett came out. But Andor is something where it's kind of like it's within the sandbox, but it's taking Star Wars and the franchise to a different place, that dark and gritty place where there are no lightsaber battles, where it does feel more PG-13 than PG. I wish it would go rated R. I wish it
Yeah,
become
that-
full-fledged Game of
exactly.
Thrones, you know, version of
I just need some
fantasy, right?
F-bombs.
Like, I would love that version of Andor. Maybe in, you know, in some future we'll be able to see that, but for now, Andor is the real deal. It's delivering on all those wants, right? It's like getting into things in a much more intelligent and sophisticated way. Lots of characters, lots of things to understand. None of the space wizardry. And actually, the show, in a lot of ways, feels a lot closer to core sci-fi rather than space fantasy, right?
Yeah,
And
so I mean,
by
Star Wars
core
has always been
sci-fi-
more fantasy than science fiction, in my opinion.
Yeah, like this feels very much like you know,
Almost
social
cyberpunk.
commentary in the sci-fi setting, and that's always, to me, what makes really good sci-fi, which I've talked about on the podcast before. So like
it
Andor is in
doesn't
that
have
vein.
your rule. It doesn't meet your rule that the different technology or new technology
It does not do that.
drives the show.
But it does
It does a lot of the other things you talked about.
bring a mirror to
Yeah.
you know, the real world in the sci-fi setting. And so I applaud the show for doing that.
I didn't miss at all the lack of rated R or violence or F-bombs. I actually think that I think, you know, maybe it's easier to do and to make it quote unquote gritty if you could do the heavy violence or, you know, sexuality or whatever, right? And have it be a much darker, more violent show. And I never missed it. I think just through the way that like the writers and directors crafted each of the scenes, you felt exactly the same tension that you would feel had there been a threat of violence or, you know, bludgeoning or blood or whatever. This wasn't cartoony in any way. It wasn't like, oh, like that's silly, like the way they did that to like try and imply violence without like showing you violence. Like, it, to me, the show felt just as adult as anything else. And just because they didn't curse didn't necessarily take away from like it being a show where characters were scary or characters were upset or human, and showing their true human emotions. So I don't know that I agree with that at all. I don't know, Savon, you're cross.
Yeah, I want to clarify, because I think a common misconception people have regarding maturity for a show is that it instantly means lots of gratuitous violence and gore, which, you know, I think maybe Game of Thrones.
No, but that's what. Yeah, and that's what would give you the rated R stuff.
Well, not necessarily. That's why I disagree. So when I say maturity and stakes, like, I think Breaking Bad could be a good example, where Breaking Bad isn't a show that's based around lots of blood and gore, and outside of a few very specific moments, that's not really what the show is about, but it cleanly earns its like RM for mature rating. And I do think some of that just has to do with little small things that play into the tone. And even again, Andor is great and it's gritty and mature, but it's clear that like there's little things tonally wise that, for example, if you have an entire like prison arc, how you can have a PG-13 prison arc and a rated R prison arc, and the difference doesn't have to do with blood or gore. It could just be how things are presented on screen. You know, maybe you have more maybe you lean into showing emaciated dying prisoners. Maybe you know, rather than like they shocked them on the metal floor thing, which is still gritty and shows the, you know, the cruel conditions. But I do think there's just like a slight tonal shift that you feel. And again, I only feel that tonal shift because I've watched similar shows that are telling stories similar to Andor, and you can see, oh, well, for this one, they don't have the Disney brand keeping them from just leaning into that rated R. And again, it doesn't mean you have to drop constant F-bombs, but I do think that when you're talking high stressful adult situations, people curse. You know, we curse. It's like real people. And I do think that, you know, you don't have to drop an F-bomb every other line, but you can still at times feel how clean the dialogue is between people in what would be frantic situations that I think in almost any other like genre or like rating, there's gonna be some dams or F-bombs or SOB or something being dropped. And like I could feel that. And then, you know, even then just like we've talked about how blasters are just a cleaner form of shooting people, and it's little stuff like that it works, it's fine, but you know, I do feel that you don't have to have it be blood and guts for it to still earn a rated R, rated MA rating. But again, it's Star Wars, so that was never going to really happen. But,
Right.
And, you know, I don't think it has to be gore and cursing in order to earn that. You can do it tonally as well.
But those are the things that earn you rated R.
I mean, but like again, I'm
like
using
mature
my
theming.
Yeah,
Right?
Theming too, like Breaking Bad. Again, like most of
But
Breaking
that's
Bad
drugs.
isn't
I
violent.
mean, this isn't about drugs either.
But
Yeah,
I think there's something to be said, like especially in the finale, right? The final fracas or the final melee. You know, that could be way more brutal than
Yeah.
it was to really make sure that you felt the brutality and oppression that was at hand. And I think that would actually go a long way for the storytelling, right? Like, and
I
it
don't
doesn't
know. I didn't
necessarily
miss it.
have to be
Maybe. I didn't miss it.
blood, but there are, you know, I think there are other ways to treat violence and the impact violence has on people. That's not the Star Wars way, right?
Okay.
It's the difference between cartoon violence and real world violence.
I thought they walked
I think
fine
Star
balance there.
Wars definitely is cartoony violence.
It tends
This
to be.
is more. I think Andor is more violent than some of the others. Like,
Yeah. No,
you
by
know,
a
some
lot.
guy gets shot in the face. Usually, you don't see it. It's implied.
Yeah.
But I think there are other ways. I still think there is room for that to be ratcheted up without just blood and guts.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
And
that's pretty much
my
what I
question or my thing is, I don't think that the show necessarily needed that. Maybe you guys are arguing a little bit differently, that if it had that, it would be a richer show. I think the things they did with it were rich enough, and we should probably start moving into now a spoilers section of our show, because it seems like we want to talk about some of the details now. Savon, do you want to wrap up that thought about, you know, whether people should watch it?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about in the NBA how there's NBA players who are tweeners who you're kind of like, you're not a big man, but you're not a wing, and it kind of just puts you in like you can do a little bit of everything, but you're not amazing at one specific thing. Like, this show has a good writing, but I think that's still where it hovers in. Like, that's kind of where it feels. It just feels like you're kind of just in like a really, really good purgatory, but one that's hard for recommending to people.
I don't know. People
Like I said, I don't know any.
Kevin
Like, I don't have
Durant.
any. Like, I don't have any Star Wars fans who I would say, "Hey, yo, you need to watch this," because there's no Star Wars or space battles and shit, and that's what a lot of people want to watch for, myself included. It's hard for me to just tell Tyler and Kendall, "Hey, y'all want to watch this dude learn about the oppressions of the imperial government and how people can be enabling systems unwittingly." Like, I don't even watch that shit. You can watch a documentary about that and get that story. I'm watching Star Wars. I want to see people throw rocks with their mind.
Well, when you put it that way, this show sounds boring as shit.
No, it's good, but like when you don't think that when you think Star Wars, like that's what it comes to.
There is one space battle that was pretty effing dope.
That was cool.
I will say.
All right, let's get into some spoilers. So if you haven't seen the show and we haven't ruined anything for you, you know, sign off now, go watch the show, come back to us when you're finished in a couple of weeks. All right, let's get started. So the first season that we just saw, and there's supposed to be 2 seasons of this, and one thing that was interesting was it had 12 episodes, right? We haven't seen a Disney Plus show have 12 episodes that I can recall. And I think that allowed the series to breathe, but it also meant that it had several arcs that kind of happened, kind of several crests throughout the first season. There will be a season 2. It's already started in production. I don't know when they're going to try and bring it out, maybe in a year and a half, something like that. The first kind of 2024. Okay. So the first section is like Cassian is isolated. He's kind of a loner. He says he's looking for his sister, and he ends up killing 2 men and hiding out on his home planet to sort of try and avoid detection because of the crime that he committed, or the impulse killing he had. He was reacting. He wasn't just like executing people. And then there's kind of the second arc where he ends up having to sort of flee. He ends up kind of getting roped into this heist, basically on a different planet that ends up being kind of cool, and we'd love to see more stories there. And then the last kind of half of the series kind of dives into him, his life, how he sort of becomes more of a leader, how he becomes really seeing the Empire for what it is, as a huge threat rather than just sort of this benign force that sort of is everywhere. And he realizes sort of how unhinged the Empire becomes. And so he kind of has these peaks and troughs in terms of where we're going. We end up in very different settings for a few episodes at a time. We haven't seen a show like that, probably because we haven't seen a show that's as long, as many episodes as that. How effective was this like character building? Was the plot structure for you having 12 episodes? Savon, I know you haven't quite finished the show, but how is sort of the lay of the land going for you?
It's interesting because I think them doing 12 episodes ultimately is a good idea. I do think this show kind of has a almost early Game of Thrones pro/con where you have lots of threads, but man, if you're not interested in the thread, it hurts just the pacing of the show. And like your boy Kern, who I get how they're trying to set him up. Like, I get the direction they're setting him up with, and he's an interesting character, but I think if you're into a lot of these different arcs, it's really dope. But having a lot of different plot lines inherently means that it's going to be harder to keep the viewer engaged in all of them. And so the more plot lines you have, the more likely it is that someone's just going to say, hey, I don't really care about this as much. And so, maybe y'all might feel a little differently about each plot line, but I think the length of the show overall is a good thing. But they do kind of have a lot of plot threads going on that sometimes can start to be a lot to follow. Like, you got like multiple stories on the people who are supporting the rebels, multiple people who are within the Imperial stuff. Like, I like it. Ultimately, I think it's a good thing, and I would rather have this be at this many episodes than be 9 or 10. I just have questions about some of the plot lines themselves.
Gotcha. Did it work for you that there were sort of like 3 different climaxes to the show?
I guess yes and no. And I guess some of
it's
it is,
almost like 3.5. Actually.
It's like also, keep in mind, part of it is that I have to finish the show, and I get it. But I guess part of my struggle is just I don't know what this is all building up to begin with. So you have a heist happen. At first it's like, okay, he's stealing a piece, and then it's like, all right, he's wrapped into this heist. But then the heist feels very separate from what the actual conflict seems to be, where he, the heist in his prison arc just feels so like that could just be 2 different seasons of this show, that it kind of like I struggle to kind of make a meaningful connection between them. But none of it's a bad thing. I think some of this is just like a personal preference of how I feel about the story. And again, take it with a grain of salt because I got to finish it. But I think my only real complaint is that they did a lot of stuff building up this huge heist that just kind of ends with everyone dying and the board kind of being almost reset for him, except with money.
Well,
and that was
I guess so. But
I get the personal development piece.
Yeah,
like, okay,
I think that's what it is.
Yeah, and I get like, personal development, the block becomes hot, police come, stormtroopers make everything hard. Like, I get it, but it still just felt like, I don't know. I guess it just depends on how much he was. Yeah, I guess it just depends on how much you were sold on him learning something from his time with the people during the heist. That's what it comes down to. Yeah. If you're really sold on his time with them and that changing him, then what that arc means for him getting the money and going to prison later means a lot. If you're less sold on it, then it just kind of feels like, all right, this is a lot of stuff that felt like didn't really go anywhere. I'm undecided on how I feel about that with how he bonded with the people, because One of them
Well,
was
he didn't.
shiesty.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, it was really just like the kid, kinda. And even then, I felt a little funny about them saying, okay, so this your homies who you've been with all these months, and then you give your manifesto to this dude who y'all all just met, who y'all distrust. Like, some of that kind of felt like, all right, we just got to get the story rolling. So I'm not totally sold on how much Andor was influenced / changed by his time with the heist group.
Well, I think
like when he handed him his manifesto and she was like, hey, here's his manifesto, I was like, okay, that's a bit much.
I think he was trying. I think the kids sensed that Andor there was more to Andor than just him being a for hire thug. And the kid was really doing his best to proselytize. He was trying to give the gospel to Andor, right? It was that kind of scenario.
Oh no,
and
perfect sense narratively, I agree. It's just are you sold on it is the question. That's the intention.
Right.
I agree.
And so like the 12 episode 3 to 4 maybe climaxes within the entire season, I think it was definitely different, right? I don't think a lot of shows have done this, especially not in recent years. Definitely not in the Disney Plus streaming era, right? Where we're used to getting 6 episodes of something and they build towards one climax, and a lot of times it's just like one long movie. Maybe it becomes overstuffed because they're trying to do too much in those few episodes. And then on the opposite end of that, we get Netflix MCU, which is like 18 episodes or something.
Good God.
But all one long moving plot towards this thing. And in Andor, we don't get that. So once the heist is over, I actually got really confused. I was like, wait a minute, that was it? That was the heist?
Yeah,
and then,
he gets
and
the
then
money
now we're
and
moving
he runs off. I'm like, oh, bet. So like my son won.
Yeah,
he won.
I was so confused at like how
But
many
he
more
didn't.
episodes of Andor there was.
Yo.
But the fact that it played out that way, once I got to the last episode, I actually felt rewarded by Andor's personal journey throughout, because trying to have him do a heel turn essentially in the course of like one simple story arc is kind of too simplistic, especially for where he was coming from at the beginning of the series, right? He's somebody who is just a survivor and he's doing whatever it takes for himself. And so he has a lot of learning to do to not just play nicely with people, but to also, give a damn about trying to do something for the greater good. Right. So there are multiple steps in his trajectory. So I am glad to see each one of those arcs a stepping stone
Yes.
for Cassian Andor.
Fucking right.
Because there is such a huge gap for him to jump, especially to where he is in Rogue One, where he's a diehard rebel.
He about
at
this,
that
yeah,
point.
ride or die.
Yeah. And then additionally, as you said, Savon, the 12 episode series just gives so much room for all the other life, all the other characters that come into play. And to me, those things are way more important to this series than Cassian himself, right? It's those things, the sort of Game of Thrones esque-ness of it all, that really bring to life the whole rebellion and the Empire. Two things that I think for the most part in the Star Wars universe are kind of just, one-dimensional caricatures of an empire and of a rebellion. Here we get both in full force and in full detail. And so I think that's the biggest credit to the 12 episode structure.
Just one thing I'm just gonna add, because and again, I have to finish this last couple episodes, and I'm sure Cassian Andor is gonna step up as a leader in a bunch of ways. But I have to say this: he didn't have to learn nothing from the heist, because he only had to learn a lesson because he got effed over by the police. They have nothing to do with the heist. My son was living it up with a baddie, had a nice little vacation spot. He had his money, his gun. Now, granted, like, the block is still hot. But let's be clear, him having to learn whatever the beginning of his lesson is him having to grow, which is because he went to prison, is not because of some greater lesson he learned. Because the police arrested him on some bullshit charges and then locked him in the slammer and they didn't even give him a chance to process. Had that not happened, homie would have not been worried about any of that manifesto crap, any of that for the rebels, greater good stuff.
Yeah.
He would have just took his bag, his sack of coins and bounced. But my point is, I feel like that's the part that makes it harder for me to say, oh yeah, he learned so much from it. It's not like he did the heist, all this awful stuff happens, he runs off with his money, then he has like survivor's guilt and decides, now I'm gonna leave it behind. He just got caught up.
Yeah.
No, but I think that's important though.
That's 100%.
Yeah,
but that's really
I guess
important.
you have to. Yeah, like it's good. Like it's good in the context of the larger story of this empire can screw over anybody. You can't pretend this isn't your problem,
right?
But it sucks from a point A to point B of this heist because all those people died and all that happened, and then all this time goes by. He got
picked up,
and the payoff only happens for them. Like their legacy's only matter because he just happens to get screwed over by the system that they warned him. Like it still feels very like, hey, bro, you learned the right lesson, but for the wrong reasons.
What do you mean for the wrong reasons? Like he's learning it because
there's no altruism in this. It's just like he's got caught up.
He's not an altruistic guy though.
I know, but
he's a survivor.
Exactly.
That's his key quality. And so he's got to be put in these scenarios where
it would feel fake if all of a sudden he was like, oh man, like I really got to look out for people. Like that's his mom. That's what his mom did, but that's not what he's doing.
Yeah, but I would have liked to have seen even just like him having I'm a little undecided. It wasn't even like you even see like there's a little bit of like conflict in him. It was literally just he was vibed out. Like even just him being a little more worried and like, oh man, I wish I could do the right thing. Even just a little bit of body language hesitancy would have sold me on just like B, which happened to you could happen to anybody. You just happen to have had this experience that you got a little perspective. But I would have liked for him to have a little bit more agency in how he's gonna. But again, maybe that'll happen more in the prison arc thing. But at that point, I still feel like, okay, you got forced into that situation. I would have liked to have seen a little bit of the hints of a changed man are there before you just got thrown into prison. I felt like I didn't get to see any hints of him having learned anything from the heist before he got locked up. So it just kind of feels like, oh man, you just it felt like you beat the game and then the game was just like, actually, no, we're trolling you. It feels a little more trolly on the universe part than like you got to learn your lesson from a him internally part.
I mean,
I don't know.
What's interesting about that though is that
it works for the larger narrative. Yeah. It just makes his growth feel like feel less earned because again, he didn't have, he had less agency in his growth.
What's interesting is that Luthen might be the one that's trolling him because Luthen sets him up, forces him to do the Aldani job. The Aldani job forces the Empire to clamp down on everybody, which is exactly what Luthen wanted, to tighten their grip of oppression. And
what an interesting thing, too. That idea was cool.
Yeah, see, I like Luthen more because I felt like in that sense, all the stuff with his character, it feels like he has a little bit more agency in his decision. So when he does something crappy or morally gray, you're like, all right, well, I see how that was his decision to make. Some of the stuff with Andor, I feel like it's things happening to him. But again, I get it. That makes sense in the context of this oppressive world where that's exactly how systems of oppression work. You have all your choices taken from you. So like, again,
and that's why he decides to go towards his Rogue One days where he's no longer that person. He's not going to passively sit by, right? In Rogue One, he's willing to do the thing that needs to be done by then.
I just wish I saw a little bit. I just wish I saw a little bit of growth before he got locked up. That's all. Give me just a little bit of that, and I would have been like, "Oh, all right, he's recognizing that this is some bullshit, and he got caught up, rather than just like he bobbed out getting ass in the hotel room, figuring out what's my day plans. He about to go shopping, get a Louis bag. I'm like, yo,
he's trying to hide his bag from the baddie.
My son was vibed out.
He was like one of those mobsters that, it gets too hot in New York, so he goes down to Miami to hide out, and he like loses focus for half a second, gets picked up.
Yeah, and I'm like, that's dope. But I'm like, man, you ain't have to do nothing. This is just bad shit happening to you.
But I think for Andor, for his turnaround as a character, I think what's interesting is that he, in a way, he doesn't arrive at just doing it for altruism's sake, right? He's
Right.
not.
No.
He doesn't like by the end of the season. It's not because he doesn't join up because he's good. Like all of a sudden he's good. No, it's that he's still a survivor, but he realizes that he's ultimately dead anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that to me is like the interesting turning point for him, right? And where maybe that change from the Aldani job to the prison and what happens after, I think all those things lead him to that situation where it's not that Andor all of a sudden is a good person, but he's kind of in a F it mode
Yeah.
where it's like, this is
Man.
what I'm gonna do now.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let spite.
I'm the captain now.
Yeah.
Man,
Yeah.
if he would have stayed in that hotel room a couple more hours, the credits would have rolled, and he would have just been in vacation land with his bag with a baddie. Roll credits, nigga. We don't even worry about the Empire right now. He doing it big.
What was he doing counting his money in the bathroom? He should have just been going a few more rounds in the hotel.
Right, and then he wouldn't even got picked up, and then none of this would have even happened.
No, but that's the
back
point is
half
he
of the
was going to
season.
get picked up no matter where he went. The Empire was just being that much of a dick, right? Like everywhere they were going. And when he comes back to that resort town, well, you don't know, I guess, but he comes back to the resort town at the end and it's abandoned. Like
Shit.
no one
I didn't pick up on that.
No one in the Empire is able to enjoy this thing. Right? Like this is going to happen no matter what. Like this idea that he doesn't have agency is right, but he's the one that has certain skills, right? He's the Liam Neeson of this universe. That he's like, if I don't do something, right, I'm just gonna die anyways. This Empire is gonna lock me up again. This is gonna happen. The same shit is gonna happen again. I can't run anymore from my problems, right? Like after Aldani, he decides to run and check out. He's like, hey, that's your problem now, guys, right? But his money isn't going to keep him safe. He's always got to look over his shoulder. Like that's not going to happen. Right. And he even comes back home. He talks to Marva or whoever, and they're just like, nah, like it's going to be, they're just going to keep coming. So I don't know. I mean, I thought that was legit in that, like, he doesn't need to change and become like a good guy. He needs to keep getting pushed and prodded until he's like, what the fuck, man? Like, I'm tired of this shit, and like something's got to change because like I'm not going to keep living in a world where everybody keeps pushing me around like this or keeps imprisoning me and takes away like what I've earned, And so I don't know. That's what I got from it. I didn't need him to become a good guy after Aldani. That situation, like you said, right? He didn't actually click together with that group very well, but he's starting to see like there are people who believe in this as a real thing, like. There is an actual thing that could happen here, right? That's all it is. It just had to plant the seed.
It's just harder to identify. I guess it's just from a protagonist perspective. It's harder to identify when their growth is because of just a crappy circumstance than like any actual interior motivation. At least for me, that's really just what it boils down to. It's just like, it's just one of those. It's like someone who only cares about racism until something racist happened to them. It's like, I get it, and that makes sense, but in the context of these other characters, that is not as compelling, even if it's realistic. So again, it's fine. It's not like a major.
I think that changes in the prison, though.
Like I said, and again, and again, in fairness, I still need to prison. And I know in the prison, he's probably gonna step up and learn all that. But dang, man, I wish he would have at least like. He could. I just wish he would have got locked up on some better reasons or something. Man. I still just got that was so bogus to watch. I was just like,
but the bogusness of it,
out like a sucker.
But the bogusness of it is what's like the whole point, right?
No, I get it. I'm just
Luthen was the one that made that happen.
Yeah, Luthen's the real
wild.
Luthen's the real MVP for me and all this. He's the real. I like his character more than Andor, honestly.
I don't know if I like his character, but it's like fascinating.
I love his character.
Yeah, his character's sick.
Yeah,
I love him.
All right, well, let's talk about that a little bit. So we get some interesting villains and some interesting characters. I don't even think I got to couch them as villains, but Cyril Karn, it seemed like you kind of found him a little bit boring. I had a buddy who really found him kind of boring and like kind of useless, but I thought he was great in terms of what we were learning about the kind of people that was in the Empire and the kind of people that were going to join up and be like zealots for this stuff. Dedra Miro, what a revelation she was. I really should look up her. Brian, can you look up her name? I keep calling her Dedramiro, and she's got an actual name, I'm sure. But she's this position that we haven't really seen before. It's an ISB, I think, director.
Mhm.
Arvel Skeen, who's the guy that was from The Bear, and ends up kind of betraying the Aldani group, the heist group.
Mhm.
Denise Goff is the one who plays Dedramiro, and hot take, Luthen, who's a man that is so righteous and calculating, but doesn't care who has to die. Not that he doesn't care, but he sort of doesn't care who has to die.
Play to win. Results oriented, baby.
Yeah, right. He's Machiavellian to the core, right? He's doing whatever it takes to take down his enemies, even if that means people he knows, people he likes, people who are on his side have to die. He's not one of those like, hey, we're gonna save every man. We're hoorah, all that like Marines. He's not that guy. What did you think about these characters that are not Cassian, but are sort of introduced throughout the show? Savon, you want to talk about Luthen, I guess.
I mean, no, it doesn't have to be about Luthen. I think in general, the show does a good job of having these characters and their unique slice of life stories, and how, specifically, what's the woman? What's the woman's name?
Dedramiro, yeah.
Dedramiro. You have really interesting characters who they aren't explicitly evil per se.
No, but she's definitely a Nazi.
They support, but like there's not really any maliciousness in her actions. And, there's lots of people who are working their jobs. There's lots of people who have jobs that support systems of oppression, and that can, people can be complicit in ways that isn't with malicious intent. Because for her, it's not like F these people in particular. It's just like, I'm just trying to be good at my job. And if you don't know how that manifests for the everyday citizen, like you're removed from that. But it makes for just very interesting characters. And that part, I think, is one of the really strong parts of the show, right? Like you get to see this. They do a good solid parallel of the rebels having deplorable people, the Empire having people who, your boy Kern. Now, did I find some of his stuff tedious in the context of the show? Yes. But in the context of his individual story, I thought it was very interesting because all his points and things he's talking about, he's not wrong at any point. How it manifests in the means is its own thing, but
obsessive behavior.
Yeah, but his points about Cassian killing the people, all that is 100% true. Like
that it can't stand, right?
The man speaks no lie. Like, say what you want about Cassian, he did murder, he did kill them dudes. Like, you gotta, you can.
They did start it.
Okay, but like if someone starts a fight with me, it doesn't justify me killing them either. You still got to take
shot first.
You still got to take, you still got to take, you still got to assign some amount of blame from his perspective. It does make perfect sense. Like he did kill those dudes. There was gross incompetence and cover-ups. Even his job he gets later is because of like nepotism and calling in favors, and he clearly is not rocking with that, right? Like nothing the dude says is wrong. So it does make an interesting point of people who aren't wrong but can still find themselves on the wrong side of history. It's very fun to watch because the dude ain't malicious. He's not a super villain. He's not twirling his thumbs. He said, Andor killed 2 of my coworkers and homies, and the people that work covered it up. That's a very good motivation to have. And, you can see how they could drop somebody to some really wild places. So, in the context of the show, I thought it found tedious because I was like, there's lots of other more interesting stuff. But as its own little slice of life, they did a great job of just having interesting characters on multiple sides of the fence who, it felt very Game of Thronesy in terms of it's very difficult to see who you're rooting for.
Yeah, keep Cyril away from the internet.
Yeah, him and the neckbeards, man.
Don't introduce him to 4chan.
I mean, this show, I don't know if it was because it was 12 episodes or because Tony Gilroy and the writers just did a really excellent job, or directors or whatever, but there were a ton of just really interesting characters that felt like they had so much depth to them. Nobody felt the same. The inside man, I don't remember who it was, but he's like an officer in the Empire, but had felt like he had been betrayed by the Empire's presence on Aldani, because I guess I think it was the story was he had a relationship with somebody from Aldani. And so his motivation was really to undo the presence of the Empire there and the Imperial like military force on Aldani. And he how did he become that way? Like there's so much going on there, right? The risks he's taking to provide them with gear and intelligence. Vel and Cinta's relationship was just really like hinted at throughout the show. I don't know that I'd want like a whole show on those two, but they're just like an interesting like presence in the show. The daughter being religious, right, really kind of creates a lot of hardship for Mon Mothma, who's kind of was a weird side character or like a very small part in one of the original trilogy movies, and then showed up again in Rogue One later, and now is in this show as a key player, right, in the rebellion, although her story is very separate from Cassian's.
Who is she in the original trilogy?
She was like one of the rebellion leaders.
She's a rebel leader. One of the leaders she's one of the main leaders of the Rebel Alliance.
Oh, I didn't know that.
She was like a general, and they took this. She had like 3 speaking lines or something, and they took her and they ended up making her a bigger part of Rogue One. And Tony Gilroy, who wrote this show, also wrote Rogue One, so he's familiar with like what's going on here. My buddy Albert really
and a bunch of the Star Wars games too. She can get her game. Force Unleashed also has a lot of the game. Star Wars Force Unleashed has a lot of stuff that's supposed to imply the start of the Rebel Alliance, and Mon Mothma was also a part of that story too. A lot of the extended universe material actually makes use of her a lot as like a rebel figurehead.
Yeah. And probably because they're trying to save like Luke and Leia for the big stuff, right? But Cyril Karn, right? His interactions with his mom, he's obsessive. He loves doing his like tailoring. He wants to look smart. He believes in, I don't know what he believes in. It's like a Law and Order fairness idea, right? He's obsessed with that.
You gotta have rules of engagement and expectations. Yeah. If you don't have them, it's anarchy.
He wants everything to be ordered. For sure.
Not wrong.
And it's not super clear how that connection is with his mom or like where that comes from, but he's got a strained relationship with his mom. Dedra Miro, Jesus Christ. She's like stiff as a board. How did she become that way? Why is she a Nazi? Why is she using her powers for Nazism in this show? Right. Like, I think you could do a whole show on her for sure. Like on how she became that way and her traveling through the ranks, or maybe what she goes on to become after this. And then I gotta mention Kino Loy, who's Andy Serkis's character in the prison. Like,
what a delight!
Oh man, what a performance from him! This guy is I don't know. There's just you almost like tear up, and it's not even milked. It's just you see him and then you don't, and it's over, and you're like, dang, that was how they sent this guy out. That we like saw this huge character shift from what he was in terms of like fully bought into the game and fully bought into like the imprisonment, and using his power as not abusive, but he kind of abused his power, right? And then eventually comes around to, oh shit, I actually have no power in this place and it needs to end.
Get that man some floaties.
Whew. Oh, what a crazy thing. So I don't know. I mean, the characters in this show, I think, lived up to it and made this into like what a great like, I don't know, pie of show.
Well, I think what's important about all these different characters is that there's such a broad range that they really show the spectrum of rebels and of imperial people, right?
Yeah.
So like not everybody is some imperial fanatic, a fascist or whatever, right? You have Cyril, who is a Law and Order obsessive, but he's ultimately very ineffective at his job. But then you have somebody, to compare him with, which is Dedra Miro, and she is incredibly capable at her job. She's calculating, she's smart, she's capable, but I would not consider her a zealot whatsoever.
No.
It seems to me she just seems like somebody who wants to climb the ranks, outperform all her peers who are slacking off, and she's going to outsmart everybody. So
she's the person who'll be good at whatever job whatever job. That's one of those people who's no matter what job or career path they do, they're going to be competent at it and rise the ranks. It just so happens that she's doing it for a really crappy regime.
Right, for the Nazis.
But it doesn't feel personal at any time.
She's
a
bureaucrat.
Personal, though.
She's ultimately a bureaucrat.
Yeah, I don't think it's personal.
I think
don't think it's personal at all.
No, but I do think she believes in like protecting the empire. I think that's the thing she believes in.
I think she believes in upholding the company that she works for.
Yeah, like my mom works for the US
she knows they're Nazis.
But like,
no, they don't think they're Nazis. That's what makes this show great, is that the people on the Nazi side don't understand that they're Nazis, And then the people on the rebel side, you know, like you could easily see that as terrorism or that as heroism.
Yeah.
You know, it could be either.
They take children hostage. They put guns to kids' heads. There's some people who will say that's unacceptable under any
Yeah,
circumstances.
I mean, they threw a bomb into a crowd. Like they're very questionable things. It's as Savon says, it's the moral gray area of both rebel and empire. And I think that's
Delicious.
what makes this show so
Yeah.
like scintillating, right? And because of that, you get all these scenes where there is a lot of tension going on because people have very different agendas. So, you know, when Luthen is talking with Saul Guerrero is angry because he cannot put Luthen into a box. He does not know if this guy is a partisan, if he's a zealot, if he's an outright anarchist. He cannot understand politically what Luthen is doing. And Luthen, you know, great character, he's sending people to die and he knows it.
Yeah.
And he is willing to do that. He's willing to burn his soul for the sunrise that he won't get to see.
He said,
that is just phenomenal writing and a phenomenal character.
He talked about throwing away your conscience,
full spectrum.
Right?
Yeah,
exactly. You get this full spectrum. You get people. It's like ultimately this show is about people within circumstances, right? And how they're playing those circumstances. And so that's where you get, you know, Andy Serkis's Kino Loy, right? Like he's just playing his hand. Cassian Andor is playing his hand. And so you could imagine that any individual in this universe, you know, might turn out a different way in a different station in life. But this is how they're playing things. And they're going to represent, you know, all of humanity essentially.
Yeah.
You know, within this story. And I think that ultimately is what makes Andor so much more interesting than the rest of Star Wars, where it's just like good guys, bad guys.
Yeah, a lot more simple. Also, just to like, and Wes, I'm gonna push back about like the whole, you know, calling her a Nazi thing. Like, it's something you got to keep in mind. There's lots of everyday people we know, friends, family who work for the U.S. government, who probably fully acknowledge the U.S. government does all kinds of awful things. But does you working for them, like, to what extent does that make you explicit? And then what does it do for your role? Like, if my mom's job is that she processes payroll for the U.S. government, well, shit, the payroll processing people was the whole point of the heist thing that they whole did, you know? If she's a pencil pusher there or a paper pusher, does that make you a villain? Or are you just somebody who's working a 9 to 5?
Yeah, but Dedra's not a pencil pusher. Dedra is an enforcement role, right? She's investigative, she's enforcement, she's policy setting. Yeah. So she's not a pencil pusher.
Yeah, but same.
But she's trying to outmaneuver her colleagues.
Yeah, but same judges, lawyers,
and outmaneuver the rebels.
Yeah, I guess my point is that these jobs
gonna get her.
I guess my point is that the jobs that we see in this show, although they're obviously portrayed in a much more dramatic way, they're very analogous to very innocuous day-to-day acceptable jobs in our own world. You know, like in this Star Wars world, it's a really dramatic council making policy, but in real life, you know, it could be your your department, you know, a local politician in the courtroom or a judge thing, and you don't see them as super villains or Nazis necessarily, but I think it, you know,
some of them.
Yeah, but my point is that you don't just see the role and think, oh, this.
Yeah.
And so it does add a little bit of like, you know, being ruthlessly efficient at your job doesn't necessarily mean that it's personal. And I do think that's an important distinction to make, that, you know, someone who just is a cog in a system and they're just working, are they better or worse than someone who's not a part of a system, but they're like, you know, your boy Luthen, who, okay, he's not upholding the system of oppression, but he still has no problem throwing people's lives for his own ends and means.
Yeah.
What is better? What is preferable? Do you want to be a paper pusher for the bad guys, or someone who's on the good guys but is okay with killing people?
Yeah.
You know, there's no right answer, but I think there's, you know, I do like to remind there's a lot of nuance with that.
Sort
like,
of,
out of all the
except
characters we see,
her failure to then be introspective about the oppression or oppressiveness of the Empire is actually then a flaw, right? If you're going to say, well, she's whip smart, able to do all these things, her inability then to see the Empire as problematic is also then a problem.
Well, I think they address
that. And that's okay, right? I mean, she's not a perfect character, like she's not a Superman character. She's not like all good or all bad. And I do agree. I think you're right. I probably overstated it that she's like into being a Nazi. I don't think that's what she would say. But she's not about freedom.
I think in context of the show, they address that in that everybody that's on that planet, is it Coruscant or something?
Mm-hmm.
You know, whenever we see Mon Mothma in these kind of like fancy cocktail chic settings, right, where she's rubbing elbows with the elite of
Mm-hmm.
Coruscant, I can't remember who, but somebody makes mention of like, oh, there's like these things going on the other planets. It's like so far removed from us, right? To me, that's very much how people on that planet feel, right? Like, you
That's how
know,
it is for us as Americans. That's
exactly.
literally
You have
Yeah.
tons of privilege. You just hobnob with the elite. You don't really know what's going on in the rest of the world, or even in the rest of the country. And so your actions, yeah, maybe you're smart enough to be aware, but what does being aware really mean for
Yeah.
people so far removed? And I think that's
Well, for
part
Dedra,
of what the show
she's
is
in these
getting at.
she's in these meetings where they're getting reports from every single sector of the galaxy. So it's not like she's not totally unaware.
Yeah, but they're
I hear
numbers,
you, though.
right?
Yeah.
It's paper.
Yeah.
It's numbers on a paper.
Yeah, and also it's not like she's gonna push back against the entire imperial structure. Like, it's not, even if you're in the room, you're not about to just be able to come in and snap your fingers and be a revolutionary. It's not that.
And that's not what she wants to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's
So I think
she's not a revolutionary.
For Dedra Miro, though, I think she will have a huge change,
You think
based
so?
on what happens in the finale and her coming together with someone like Cyril Karn, and having experienced the on the ground visceral nature of what's happening in the galaxy.
Oh, you think she become more of a?
I think. Well, I don't know what's going to happen to
Yeah.
her, but it's definitely this will have an impact on her. Right?
Oh, for sure.
She
I mean,
will. She's shaken.
Yeah,
she just doesn't
sure.
come off. I gotta finish it, but like, even just from all her portrayals on screen, they have not portrayed her in a villainous manner.
No,
She doesn't go out of her way to be cruel. She doesn't go out of her way to be mean. But I'm saying there's a difference between being cruel and villainous and working for the villains. She's not nice and she's not a good person by any means.
Right.
But there's a difference between being a good person and being just maliciously evil. And it does make, like, out of all the characters we've seen in the show, she probably has some of the least, like, probably one of the, how do I put this? Her actions are probably some of the less morally reprehensible, even when considered to protagonists.
Well, it becomes more royally. It becomes more.
It gets bad at the very end.
She starts okaying like pretty serious torture and stuff.
And that, and that's
right.
fair. And again, I'll have to finish the show to, again,
and
this
that
is based on limited stuff.
Right. It's echoing the torture that was happening right after 9/11, right?
But is that worse than what Luthen okays? You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I hear you.
And so I think that's an important question.
Because even to your point, like, torture is bad. Is torture as bad as murder? And especially in the context of what their roles are? I don't know. But I agree. It's interesting. I'm glad that y'all are saying that she clearly seems to be set up for like an interesting character arc, because I don't know what would be the point of her otherwise. But again, I like that she isn't just twirl your mustache evil, that type of thing.
Yeah.
She just wants to be good at, she's just really, she's just,
well, that's what's so great about the show. Yeah, it's exactly what you're talking about, right? Is there isn't a twirl your mustache evil. We don't see the Emperor. He gets mentioned once in one of the episodes towards the end. So, I mean, yeah, it's been just very cool to see like how all these things are playing out and how like how actually the Empire sort of comes together and what the people are doing in response to it, right? And it's very much like you just sort of get your liberties encroached upon little by little and you don't notice, right? What is it, like the frog in the soup, right? Not noticing the temperature increasing little by little.
I mean, your boy Luther said that the Empire's choking us, we gotta force their hand.
Yeah. And that was a cool I thought that was a really interesting idea, that he was like purposefully like, no, we're not trying to stave off the Empire. We're actually trying to goad them into being more restrictive, because that's what's going to draw people to our side. I was like, oh, like, yeah, I guess that does work, right? Like, if you're constantly pushing the Empire back, people are like, okay, cool, everybody, you've got that. Like, go ahead and keep doing your thing. Like, thank you for your service, right? And then that's it. They're not actually on your side. They're just like hoping that you'll do it for them. But he's bringing people to a point where they're going to have to take action. Let's keep going. I think there's it would be remiss to not talk about the world building that happened in this show. I know that it's it's a favorite pastime of people who look at these fantasy shows, but Tony Gilroy, who wrote this show, also wrote the Bourne trilogy, wrote Michael Clayton, wrote a couple other things. I think he had a hand in House of Cards. Is that what it's called? The Kevin Spacey thing?
Mm-hmm.
House of Cards.
House of Cards.
But we get to see all these different cultures. Was there anything that stood out to you as far as the ability of the show to demonstrate like these different cultures to you? I think one thing that I was talking to Miles about after we actually recorded our pod was that Tony Gilroy has done this a couple times now, where he's taking things in the Star Wars universe that feels hokey or silly and then giving them a real reason for them to exist. So the exhaust port being there in the first movie, where it's kind of like, why would the Empire just have this random exhaust port? Oh, like just because it's a story, it needed to happen for the story. He retcons that as being like, actually, that was there because an engineer was displeased with how the Empire was running thing and purposefully set it up that way, right? And tried to get it under the radar so that they wouldn't notice. Here, the Empire is arrogant and continues to overlook and can't imagine, right? Like, and they're scrambling a little bit. They're not at their strongest point yet. And so he builds in these reasons how the Empire is actually losing sometimes, rather than just being like complete, like stormtroopers can't aim, blah, 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 blah. It's actually, there's real reasons why they're struggling to maintain their control over people. Brian, did you notice anything here that kind of stood out to you as far as world building went?
I mean, I think this is where the show really shines, is all the details that they put into the different locations, the different communities that we visit with. Every environment that we inhabit on this show has its own idiosyncrasies that really breathes life into all the portrayals. Like,
It was
and
so good. All
and
that stuff was
so
so good.
I mean, I think there's yes to what Miles is saying about giving reasons for things existing, but there's also things that only exist to be a detail.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are actually quite valuable in world building too, that I think a lot of creators often overlook. Like just the fact that Mon Mothma takes off these like two brooches on her attire to then like open it up, like that is just like a cool detail about
Yeah.
futuristic sci-fi attire. Or the her and her people, they drink that cocktail that has the worm in it
Oh yeah,
that
yeah.
she finds disgusting, and would rather not have, right? Like just elements like that really breathe life into their own culture and existence. I think one of the best examples though is actually within the prison itself, and the way the prison is designed is ingenious. Like it actually like
Yeah,
takes
evil genius, man.
it
Whoa.
takes the primary Empire designs, like the cold, like white lights and kind of like plastic setting, but turning everything stark white and sterile so that the sterileness feels oppressive. And then it's got the food dispensers, and the fact that there's a competition going on for taste and then flavor in the food, and that the people that lose the competition in the work environment are the ones that are getting fried. There's just the way the structures of the sleeping quarters, how they change shifts, and how they communicate with people on different floors of the prison. Um, Everything that happens in and around the prison is so well thought out that it feels real, and so you feel the cruelty and dehumanization and the oppression of the Empire so much more than I
Yeah.
think I've felt in a long time in Star Wars. And then what you find out, what those widgets that they're making, what that's for, like that's just icing on the cake.
Yeah.
And so all those details, wrapping into each other, I think it just creates such a rich world for Andor and all these characters to inhabit.
Savon, did you want to talk about the world building that they did in the show?
No, I thought the world building was solid overall. The only
Yeah, it's fine. It's cool.
It was so good. Oh.
My only real complaint, and again, maybe the prison arc will change this, but I was disappointed at the lack of aliens that we've seen.
I know. I
Andor
picked up on
so
that
far.
too, actually.
And I thought it was a lot of missed potential, mainly because one of the best things about Star Wars from just a design and visual perspective is all these unique races, and we got a little bit of that, but not a lot. Like we had the four-arm surgeon do it. I was like, okay, we got a little bit, but I wanted more of that because a big theme in Star Wars is, it's obviously the Empire is meant to be critical of actual empires and colonialism and all that. But yeah, exactly. No. Yeah, like a huge thing in Star Wars that they, to your point, Wes, they kind of retcon a little bit with the series is, and actually they kind of hinted it well in the original series too, and I'll give them that. Is the Empire is very anti-alien. Anyone who's not human faces lots of discrimination. And even in the Clone Wars series, there's slavery, discrimination, like labor camps based on races. And this actually might lean into that point I was making before, Brian, about tone. You could really get into some really dark territory about the implications of that the show just clearly didn't want to open that can of worms because they could have. And I felt like that was a missed opportunity because the prejudice against non-humans is huge. And just Star Wars, the potential, right, of these different alien races that often have powers that are more than what a human would have. Right? There's multiple species in Star Wars that basically have the equivalent of superpowers. Like Wookiees are super strong and have super strength. There's species that can fly and do mental crap and all that. So I felt like they really could have done something dope with that and didn't. Especially considering, one, Star Wars is historically great at world building. Two, you already have so much world built out from the larger canon. It's not like you got to make up something totally new. You could take already existing concepts and then expand on them in a way that wasn't before, And yeah, I mean, I just thought that was a missed opportunity. That was a big missed opportunity for me. But the culture building for the human stuff and all that, I thought it was great. But even the people with the eye and all the stars falling, like, had some of them just threw some aliens in there. I make them an alien race.
Savon, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Your shit says that you're offline now. I don't know if your shit's recording.
And it says recording for me.
Oh, it does? Okay.
Mm-hmm. I don't see any alerts.
Okay. Hopefully it's all right.
I hope so too.
But yeah, I agree with you. I did notice the lack of non-human beings
compared to Book of Boba Fett, which just had aliens for days. And I'm like, dude, give me like the aliens and character designs from Boba Fett with the writing and grittiness of Andor turned up a notch. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I want. That's that good stuff.
I wonder if Tony Gilroy and company shied away from that because they figured they couldn't figure out how to make them serious enough, right? Mm-hmm. Without practical aliens feeling a little on the sillier side of things. I wonder.
I feel like, I don't disagree with you. I mean, that's a fair critique. I think Star Wars, though, has a good, even then, they do a decent job of, like, there's a good blend of aliens that look nothing like humans and aliens that are, like, near human.
Humanish,
humanish. Like, you can still have your Darth Maul, fancy color skin humans with horns and the Twi'leks with tentacles. I thought you still could have had that and still have grounded human performances to keep it more grounded, but still have that, like, this is a big multi-species world. I feel like it's just a missed opportunity when you're talking about an oppressive regime that actively screws over people for their benefit. That was a big missed opportunity.
Fair enough. I think that's good. I didn't really pick up on that. I did see it addressed as, like, you're not, in some ways, because the Empire is pro-human, right, or is human-centric, you're not going to see other alien species working at the Empire at the highest levels. And so that's some of the stuff we saw. But yeah, I mean, maybe on the other side, we would have seen more of it.
Yeah, you'd think you'd see more in the prison.
Yeah.
Right? I was like, what? Everybody in prison is human?
Well, they got sorted. They made clear that they got sorted.
They did get sorted. So, but even then, but even then, it's weird because in the previous everything else with Star Wars, they do a great job of establishing that the Rebel Alliance is made up of lots of different species. Like, to your point, right? Like, even they say, the Bothans died, a bunch of Bothan spies died to get this information, and Battle of Hoth. Like, even in the OG movies, the Rebels are made up. The diversity is very obvious. So it's really weird that they, even when you're seeing the beginnings of the Rebel, like even in that little. I mean, I guess some of it makes sense because you're sneaking into an Empire camp and you need a group of humans. But I feel like for writing, I feel like there's ways that they could have done that writing wise where you could still show more aliens. Just having none on screen was like, oh, okay, I guess.
Season 2, let's see the Rebel Alliance become more diverse.
Yeah, I was a little disappointed to see a very human-centric Rebel Alliance. Doesn't feel like an alliance to me. The allies they say that they're a Rebel Alliance.
What kind of Aryan allies are these?
Right?
Well, I did notice that the Empire had a more diverse cast, right? In the original movie, it was just all white dudes. And I think that was on purpose, but, Now the Empire is made up of evil black people and evil Asian people as well, chilling in there, and evil women.
Well, they didn't seem evil.
Not evil, but you know what I mean. They're on
But
the.
they're in the mix.
They're on the Empire side.
Yeah, I think they're just leaning more into the human-centric side of the Empire than just them being a placeholder for like white colonialism, imperialism.
See,
obviously it's still there.
This is why I want to talk about it. You guys have all these thoughts. Yeah,
I did like that everybody in the Empire is basically British. I
think that's a real thing.
Because Star Wars was made in America, and if you got an American show or American product, and you got to get people to understand, hey, they foreigners and they're not cool. Who was the first to meet?
Make them Russian or make them British.
Depends on what decade you're talking, but yeah, you know, if it's the 80s, if it's the Cold War, it's the Russians. If it's, you know, depending on what area, it might be China.
Yeah, the more evil they get, the more accented it's going to be. Right now, British is just like asshole language for them.
Right. If it's the 2000s, you just have to do like just vague Middle Eastern. Just, you know, when you're American, just who's the general antagonist shifts from decade to decade, depending on who we're beefing with internationally.
Yes. It's code. You have to shortcut things. All right, let's finish up here. So this show is very much in the like grounded, like we said, there's no Jedi, there's no lightsabers, there's very little actually non-human, you know, going on here. What's the right balance moving forward? And this maybe is directed at Savon. What is the right balance moving forward for Star Wars between, you know, this excellently grounded show that takes place on the ground versus, you know, or we get to see like the real people and how these things are made up, compared to movies where we're getting to see our S-tier heroes and our villains like Rey and Kylo Ren. How should sort of Disney and Lucasfilm, how should we sort of successfully move forward? Should it just be like, no, let's go all the way back to, it's got to be the fantasy and it's got to be lightsabers to stay true to the original vision of George Lucas? Should it be, actually, let's do a lot more of this grounded stuff? Like, where are you at?
You got to do it the way Marvel does it. And I think with where they are currently, which is just, you adjust the tone and genre based on the story you're trying to tell. Some stories are better to be more mature. Some aren't.
Is this big enough? Like, are we going to get whiplash trying to do something like that?
No, not
like,
really.
You're already complaining this isn't Star Wars.
Well, for me, it's because I think they didn't go far enough. That was my complaint. I think the MCU's gotten better about like having some movies be super serious. No, I'm saying like, okay, like my MCU example, especially with later stuff. Some stuff in the MCU, like She-Hulk, sitcom, they did not shy away from the fact that it was a sitcom compared to terrible. Loki, which was, you know, really, really surrealist in this adventure and all that, which, you know, I didn't enjoy, but it was clearly meant to be its own. Like they went full tilt on what the tone of that was meant to be. And I think that for Star Wars, they can and should do the same. And they already, and historically they have done that, right? Like even with Star Wars, you see how the Force in some Star Wars stories, the Force is very limited and doesn't do a lot. Other versions of the Force, it's like an anime throwing all kinds of crap, pulling ships out the sky. It's fine for it to be consistent.
Attack of the Clones, we're looking at you.
Yeah, you just got to know, but it's fine. You just got to know what you want the tone of this like series to be. I think Andor worked in terms of doing a different type of tone. Like I said, my biggest critique was that they didn't lean far enough into that tone. Don't give me just a crew of prison. Give me graphic depictions of what like actual slavery for an alien race might look like under the Empire and people dying and like, you know, you don't have to show people getting wiped out, but leaning hard on what you can still get really gritty on what the after effects of that are. I think that's what this show could have really done most. And for Star Wars in particular, I think, and again, this is like a brand association thing. This show was really good. This show isn't very fun. And I still think Star Wars needs a certain level of fun in there that I think personally is just like, and it should be inherent to the Star Wars brand. Like I said, and this is like, it doesn't take like the show writing amazing, but there's never a point where I'm just like, hyped up, excited, that feeling and a lot of stuff that I normally expect to get from a Star Wars experience. I think the show still has room for that. Maybe it happens towards the end. Maybe I'm just like, it's going to happen at the end in the finale. But I still felt like the show can be serious and mature and do all this and still have a little bit of fun in it. I feel like there's not a lot of fun in here. It's very just gloom and doom serious. But mainly, Star Wars just needs to be able to have something that comes out that's rated R/MA. That's really what it boils down to. Because
Okay.
if you get caught in that middle ground, it's tough, man.
This isn't middle ground.
Yes, it is. This is like a rated R story with a PG-13 label on it. Like that's what it is.
Nah.
It's the way Black Adam should have been rated R. You know, it's just like you could tell that the movie was like, all right, we're right there at the cusp, but we're gonna just do a few things differently that's gonna stop it from being this rating, and I think that holds it back.
I think the writing is so good on Andor
So good.
that its inability to go beyond PG-13 doesn't hamper it enough, right?
Good word, hamper.
Like it still does what it needs to do, even though we realize it has those restraints on it.
Mm-hmm. But I still maintain that it's very hard to pinpoint who I would recommend this show for, despite its extreme quality. Like I still maintain that that's like a big reason why I feel that way. It's weird.
I mean, I agree with you. The show is lacking that fun energy, and there's almost no humor in the show at all.
The closest humor is when he's getting screwed over by the police, and it's really like an uncomfortable, like, oh, you about to get hit with that shit. Oh.
Yeah. Or like he's talking to the droid that might break his neck.
Yeah, I'm just like, all right, we're laughing here.
He meant to look at me.
But I'm like, yo, this is like we're watching like a real like police brutality chokeout. Like, let's call it what it is. But that was good.
Yeah, I mean, like I think those things are missing, but I actually enjoy that. Like to me, that's what makes the show way better.
Like, how do you get a non-Star Wars fan to watch this, knowing that if you're not into Star Wars, all of the background Empire stuff, no one's even gonna care about?
They are gonna care about it.
Dude, people who are not into Star Wars not about to just watch Andor in a vacuum and say, "Oh yeah, man, this is fire," recognizing that they're not even probably deeper into the larger Star Wars lore. Even if it's a great show.
I think they would. I think they do enough in this
sell
to establish what it is. I hear you. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I totally disagree. I think anybody could watch the show and pick it up and be like, man, like I think they do have to give it the first 3 episodes though. Because I've heard a lot of people say they watched the first one and maybe the second one and felt like it was kind of too slow for them. But once you hit that 3rd episode, and stuff starts to go down, I think that's where the show really picks up. And as long as you're willing to give it 3 episodes, I think almost anyone could buy into the show. But yeah, I still want the stories that are about the Jedi and about Luke or whoever, about Rey, or any of the Jedi. And I want stories like this. I think this has been such a breath of fresh air, but I don't know that I want every show to be like this. So I do want them to still make shows about those S tier characters, right? Who have superpowers, who have the use of the Force, but make it good, right? I think some of the part has been like, hey, you've just sort of been pandering, or you've been like fan servicing, and you haven't gotten into what makes these characters tick in the way that you could have. And so, that's what I would want, right? I'm not necessarily like, oh, I have to be one or the other. I think you just have to keep making shows that are good. So that's where I'm at. Brian, you're done.
I could care less about any of those other characters. All the good characters are gone anyway. Like Han Solo's gone. He was the best character. And so I'm like,
no one's ever cared. The Skywalkers have always sucked. Let's just call it what it is.
No more Jedi.
I like them.
I'm tired of the Jedi. I'm tired of Skywalkers. They're really boring.
Chosen bloodline.
Like, give me Luthen. I love Luthen. Give me Saul Guerrero. I love him. Like these are the kind of characters that I'm invested in. If they make more of this stuff without any Jedi, I'd be totally happy.
Cool. All right.
Wait, one thing I'll say though, Rogue One did a great job of being tonally serious and dark and still being fun.
Oh, that definitely had fun.
It was definitely fun.
And I think that
I am one with the Force. And the Force
I think the existence of Rogue One is proof that you can have a middle ground of a dark, gritty, realistic story. Like that movie is basically a suicide mission run for the entire group. It is not a happy ending. It is a very dark movie. And yeah, I mean, it's just a really, really dark movie, but there's still lots of action and little bits of humor to make levity for what is still a very sad ending. And I think Andor can find a better balance with that.
Fair enough. All right, well, let's wrap it up there. I have no idea if the last 10 minutes or so recorded Savon what he's saying, so there may just be big gaps where Savon was saying really interesting things. We'll see what happens when we record this episode. We don't have a backup maneuver here. Friends, hit us up on @confidently_pod on Instagram. Respond to our questions. Tell your friends about us. We've been having a blast doing the show. I hope you guys go watch Andor if you haven't already. I guess if you listen to the spoilersy version, you've probably seen some of it at least. So keep watching. It's great.
It's a good show.
Tyler and Kendall, you should definitely watch this show. It's very good.
They ain't got no lightsabers. There's no like big
Kendall
old
would especially
none of that.
like it. Kendall would love this show.
All the gangster shit from Star Wars, they don't have it, but they got good writing.
Tyler is a filmmaker himself. He would appreciate the care with which this was made. He's gonna love it. Guys, you'll like this show. It doesn't need lightsabers to be successful. It's been amazing show. One of the best of this year, I think. Not even just Star Wars show. It's been one of the best shows we've seen this year. All right, I'm out. Yes.
Should watch more shows.
I mean, that's probably also true.
It's a show.
All right.
It's really good.
It's very good.
It's
All
really
right.
good.
Let's end it there. Have fun, friends. Bye.
Incredible!